Why? Why? What is it doing?
And as we go through, please ask any questions that come to you in the chat. We're going to have a good amount of time for discussion. So the more we can sort of capture thoughts as they come up and have a vibrant discussion, of the richer our conversation can be. So please, Monica, if you wanna first.
Thank you, Kirsten. Sure. I'll just share my
Oh,
slides.
actually, I'll say that 3 minutes before the end, I'll turn my video on so you can see. This worked in past well. And then if you're over time, I'll just start flashing my video silent a little bit so you have a sense that its time is up. So I'll be like flashing on and off.
Okay, if I don't notice, please feel free to.
And then and then a little bit after I'll cut you off, but you do have a little bit of extra time if needed.
Thank you. Okay, so I have my presentation up. Can I someone let me know if they can see my slides?
Yep.
Yep,
Looks
perfect.
Thank
you. Perfect. So my name is Dr. Domenica De Pasquale. I am here presenting research conducted at Conestoga College in partnership with Union Cooperative. My colleague, my research partner and colleague is also here and will be assisting me in some of the questions later to come. So as a brief overview, I'll be talking about the literature, which will bring me into the current research. I'll provide some summary of the research and the key findings. So I'm going to use impact investing as a blanket term right now, and then we'll break down what terms we're actually looking at as we move forward. So impact investing provides capital to address social and environmental issues. And impact investing in Canada grew from a $4 billion industry in 2012 to a $15 billion industry in 2018. And despite this tremendous growth, there's still a lack of understanding not only on what attracts retail investors to impact investing, but also what language resonates with these investors. So what's in a name? Alternative investing strategies have gained prominence in recent years in conjunction with growing recognition of the financer's role in contributing to environmental and social issues. Some of the common delineations, including ethical investing, responsible investing, impact investing, and ESG investing, are common terms that are being used. However, there's a plethora of increasing nuanced language like social investing, sustainable investing, community investing, mission-based investing, and many, many others that are becoming more prevalent. So this kind of leads to some sort of conceptual fuzziness. So researchers are often use these terms interchangeably, which adds confusion to how they differ and where each asset class is best applied. And when I say asset class, I mean that name that we refer to. So whether it's responsible investing or social investing. So there are several factors that are attributing to this conceptual fuzziness, such as the evolution of topics over time and the aggregation of terminology and terminology that and the standards for these. So for example, ethical investing was used, and now there's more lean towards responsible investing. And when you look at responsible investing, that is then further broken down to impact investing and ESG investing. So this continues to grow and more terminology is being presented. So there are rarely accepted definitions for each term, and the literature is attempting to compare the terms and argues that these definitions still remain unclear. Okay, so the conceptual fuzziness in these definitions of key terminologies has resulted in ambiguity about the investment style that is best suited for select purposes, so such as direct public offering. So what is offered to the public for them to invest in? So showing you the screen, I'm not going to read through each definition, but it's here to show you that each one of these asset class does have a specific unique definition that's similar, but yet has its own version. There's also something that's referred to as the social financial continuum. And to give you a very simplified example, we have traditional investing on one end, which is the stock market and mutual funds, all the way to the venture philanthropy. So the responsible investing is when individuals are screening out. It's more likely they're going to screen out things. So they don't want to invest in something that has firearms or any kind of war weapons. Then there's impact investing, and this is more of like a targeted investing. So invest in affordable housing. And these individuals are more likely to accept a lower rate of return on their investment. And all the way on the other side is this philanthropy investing, which is more of like a charitable giving. They invest their money, but they accept any loss. Okay, so again, very simplified version of this social finance continuum, but this has been presented in the literature. So this brings us to the purpose of this current study, which is we are attempting to understand which asset class is best suited for a direct public offering of a social enterprise. So simply put, what does the public look for and what resonates with them when we have a social enterprise that we're trying to offer them? So this, again, as I mentioned, was in partnership of Union Sustainable Development Cooperative, which is a not-for-profit cooperative that is seeking to provide affordable housing for refugees. They are seeking investors who are willing to take less of a return on investment that can typically be found on the stock market, but they want to have a positive impact with their investment. And again, as I mentioned, their first tenants will be refugees. So what I'm going to be presenting on is part of a larger research project where we had focus groups, market surveys, and IVR surveys, which are interactive voice response. And today I will just be focusing on the focus groups. So we ran 15 virtual focus groups within a 2-week period. And within these focus groups, they're broken down into 3 distinct categories. We had union cooperative members, so individuals who have already invested into the cooperative. We had prospective members, so these were individuals that were part of our newsletter. They've attended information sessions but haven't yet invested. And then the survey respondents who previously were unaware of union cooperative and were just interested in participating in a focus group. What we found is across all 3 distinct groups, there were varying investment experiences. So we had individuals who were comfortable investing their own money and others that were working with a financial advisor or just getting into the investing world. They ranged from young adults to retiree. Most were joint decision makers. So they were in a partnership and they were primarily located in Kitchener-Waterloo. And this is because this is where our first resident will take place. And overall, especially in the 2 groups of the members and prospective members, they were looking to make a positive impact with their investments. So in the focus group, we asked them a series of questions. A summary of these questions were their experience with investments, the purpose of union cooperative, and what they saw the roles of the members to be, their interests, hesitations, positive and negative impacts of a structure like union cooperative, the language regarding investments, and like who would they recommend and who did they see the profile of investors that would be interested in this type of investment. Again, for this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the language regarding the investments. So we asked them, 1, to generate any ideas of the language that resonated for them, but also we gave them 6 options. And I'm going to start with the 6 options, and then we'll go into the other category. So we gave them these 6 options of ethical investing, social impact investing, responsible investing, environmental social governance, invest in affordable housing, and invest in community ownership. Across the board, what we found was that they did not like environmental social governance. This was something that did not resonate with the majority of our participants. If a participant did acknowledge this one, it was because they had previous experience and because of their background, they knew what this meant. With the remaining 5, what we found was that there was a distribution of what they liked. And with all of these, there were individuals mentioned some positives, but also some negatives. But what came across as the most popular, or the one that resonated most with these individuals, was invest in community ownership. So they really like the idea of being clear on what they're investing in, and this spoke to it being local and in their own community. Second was social impact investing. This was also very popular and resonated with our participants. And thirdly, there was invest in affordable housing. This one came with a lot of discussion. So with investing in affordable housing, there were some concerns about if there's any stigma around using this name. Will people really understand what's happening here? So these were the top three when given 6 options. Before invest in affordable housing, so technically the next popular one was in this other category. And again, what came out as what resonated most with our participants was the local or community focused name and sustainability. They were that word was used quite often, even before we introduced these terms. They would use the term sustainability, community focused, local, and sometimes they would even use ethical as well, but that did not come out in our top 6 that they were interested in. Other words that they were interested in were like anything that had to do with the social aspect, including having words that include economical or fiduciary responsibility, democratizing city buildings, or democratically owned. And also there was some talk around the word regenerative, because they're taking a building and they're changing it over. So in summary, there were pros and cons to most of the words that were presented to them, and within the discussions of these other words that they kind of came up with themselves. But the most popular were community, local, sustainable. What we found also was that they all said that as long as the language is clear and concise, they would probably look into what the investment was, but it had to be accessible language to start. They made a point of not having it very academic. They didn't want anything that was too academic or financial. They wanted to be able to understand the general gist of what this investment was by the name of it. And this is really interesting because, as I mentioned, in the literature, we have all of these terms that are floating around and academics are debating them, and what the population is saying, we just want it to be simple and we just want it to make sense to us. And again, another part of this wording was that they wanted it to be clearly connected to an organization's goals. So if it was connected to their mission statement or vision statement, they were saying that it could then be tailored. So you could use community focused in one area, sustainable in another, because both connect directly to an organization's mission and vision statement. So the key takeaway is that there's misalignment between the language used in academics or academia and what investors are looking for. So my title still stands. We're still looking to see what type of investor we are looking for, whether it's a community investor, affordable housing investor, sustainable investor, and the list continues. Thank you.
Thank you. So questions, thoughts, reflections? I have a question. So the terms that came up, were they familiar to people from, do you have any sense of?
Finished 2 minutes earlier.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, I have my mute on, so I'll be fine. Do people, like, did any of the questions give you an informal sense of whether people are seeing investment opportunities, in a sense? Do you know what I mean? Like is there any sense that they're liking ones because that's what they see, or are they even seeing any opportunities as a normal retail investment to do social impact investing?
Yeah, so we did talk about that. And I think right now, if we think about the responsible investing, where it's more so being selective of what they don't want to
Right.
invest in. They were more so talking about, we talked about how like a couple of years ago, you couldn't go to your financial advisor and say you wanted to have some sort of ESG investing if they knew what that was, so environmental social governance. At this point, they really, especially in this prospective member group, they knew that they wanted to make a good impact, like make a positive impact with their investment, but they didn't know really how to find that and if it was what they were looking for. So again, that's why I connected back to, they wanted to make sure that it was connected directly to the organizational business mission statement and value statement, because that kind of gave them more comfortable of like, okay, yes, it's doing what they're doing. Because they were hesitant around terms like ethical investing because of that. The greenwashing is what they called it.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? I can ask one more just quickly. So how do you, how would you follow this research to get a sense of what like how close does this get you to, like, from positive, what people say to what they will do, like where they will put their money?
Yes, and that's a great question, because what people say they'll do versus what they actually do is very different. So I think moving forward, we will be looking at, so we have some A/B testing. We're going to use some of these words and see what individuals are like clicking on to see if that actually matches up with what they say. And then eventually, hopefully following up in a couple of years or like even next year, seeing did they actually invest? If they did or didn't, what were their hesitations? So I see a comment, A/B testing. So that is kind of like marketing testing. So we will provide different types of advertisements that are slightly different. So in one advertisement, it might use the term sustainable investing, and another advertisement, it might use ethical investing, and we'll see which one individuals are more likely to click on. And then we will line that up. So we'll have like a consistent one, and then we'll have some variations of them, and we'll see what generates more interest and if that matches up with what they're saying they're interested in.
And so in some of this data, will you be able to actually track individuals, or that's in the distributions?
It'll be in the distribution.
Yeah, okay.
For
whether it gets the same response in that. Yeah.
For the A/B testing, for sure. For the focus groups, we'll be able to see if there's like an increase in our membership who invested,
right.
and the follow-up of how many people are still prospective members.
Right.
Yeah.
In terms of the research too, it's an interesting place for getting separation, because the very fact that you're engaging in this way with a focus group, people will feel heard and have expressed their deeper values. So that will probably actually have, which in the local context, that's great, but that might actually get them to invest more, right? So yes. It's separating between people who've been in a focus group before and what new members or the internet would be really interesting to see as well.
Yes, exactly. And I think that they, especially the prospective members, they literally just donated their time because they wanted to hear more about this. They wanted to be more involved. So I think that this focus group also, it was great research to do because it highlighted the amazing people in the community that want to do well or do better in their community.
So if anyone has a last question, we can ask it now. Otherwise, let's go into Darius' presentation.
I think Fiona has a question in the, yeah, go ahead, Domenica. Yeah, you saw that.
So it says, will you be able to see if they act on these words? So I'm not sure if you mean if they actually act on them in the sense of invest, if that's the question.
Yes, sorry, I was trying to be a little shorthand there.
Right.
Exactly, like, so you can test to see which words resonate more.
Yeah.
But then will you be able to see, do they act on them then? Do they actually do it?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to my colleague Anthony for this question, because that's a great question. Anthony?
Yes, so that is the plan. So we are working on that. We've still got a few technical elements, but we think we'll be able to follow them right through from, did they click on the ad? Did they join the mailing list? Did they invest? We probably won't go to the point of how much they invested, just because at that point, I don't think our sample sizes will be big enough to be meaningful. But we'll be able to track through the cycle from start to end. So it may be that, some of the message resonates really well with people in terms of language, but those aren't the people who have the money to invest. So we might be aiming for a few different markets.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how much they invest probably isn't actually in the end that important. it's more like, did they actually act on those value-based words, really? Interesting.
And the hope is that unions price themselves in a way, so $500 is the membership, that it's accessible to most middle class Waterloo Region residents. So agreed, that's really kind of our bar. They'd like to get as many people members as possible, but also make sure that the investment is enough that logistically it's possible to manage them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Daria?
All right.
Again, I'll turn on my screen after.
Perfect. Can you all see this? Yes? Okay, perfect. Excellent. So, hi everyone. My name is Daria Tarna. I'm a postdoc fellow at the University of Toronto. I just finished my PhD, which looked at renewable energy cooperatives in Ontario and many of its aspects. So I'm going to speak about it a little bit. But one part of my thesis specifically focused on what the research show as low level of member engagement in renewable energy cooperatives. Oh, sorry, I should do this. And I really want to see if this was also the case in Ontario, but because in the co-op world, we talked a lot about, associated benefits of member engagement and cooperation and democratic practice, learning democracy, capacity for future democratic action. And I thought that this was really a missed opportunity for renewable energy co-ops, at least elsewhere, as research shows. So I really want to understand the lay of the land in Ontario, as in how this plays out in Ontario, and also can we get insights into the underlying factors, right? And most of the research has sort of just been documented, low level of member engagement, but we haven't really looked into the underlying factors behind it yet. So just quickly, what are renewable energy cooperatives, in case you haven't heard of them? It's a co-op that generates electricity or heat from renewable sources. And especially in the global north, the energy is often sold to the grid. So through usually a procurement agreement with the government called the feed-in tariff. It's usually a 20-year contract. And that's what sort of spurred the renewable energy co-op activity in Ontario as well. And sort of the hotbed of renewable energy co-op activity is Europe. As you can see, as of 2 years ago, there were over 3,000 renewable energy co-ops, with 80% of them being in Denmark and Germany, because Denmark sort of started this in the 1970s, 1980s, in the post-oil crisis and environmental movements. And in Germany, this started in the 1990s. So it has a rich history in these two countries. However, the rate of these organizations' numbers going up is it's stagnated and even is in decline because of what I just talked about, feed-in tariff programs that were available. They are being taken away from almost every jurisdiction that had them. So the literature overall identifies three key issues with renewable energy co-ops. One of them is over-reliance on policy and programs. And this is unsurprising, right? It's a community, usually community-based organizations. Renewable energy projects are costly. They're technically demanding and engineering demanding, and so it's not really easy in any sense to develop a renewable energy project. And especially if you do not have feed-in tariff programs, especially with specific considerations for community groups, such as renewable energy co-ops, what ends up happening is that these community-based actors cannot compete with corporate giants, right? In accessing the grid and getting feed-in tariff contracts, right? Because these organizations have immediate access to the money, expertise, and labor power through their employees. So this is one issue that really the literature focuses on, and how can it be enhanced? How can the policy environment, the enabling environment be enhanced? What can renewable energy co-ops do? So this is one area of attention. The second one is, which I also looked on, and hopefully I'm going to have a piece published on this soon, is the lack of marginalized community participation, right? Most of this activity is in the global north and in white affluent communities, with most members being men. So I looked at that in Ontario and the reasons, again, factors behind that. But what I'm going to be talking about today from Ontario's perspective is this lack of democratic member engagement, right? So very low levels of member engagement in AGMs, in events, even reading newsletters. So is this also the case in Ontario, and why? So I just want to give a very quick background of renewable energy co-ops in Ontario. Their history goes back actually before the Green Economy and Green Energy Act, because I'm not sure if all of you know the wind turbine and the exhibition place, that's 50% co-op owned by a co-op named Windshare. It was actually done without any policy support, and as well documented, it was quite a difficult process. But Ontario in 2009 passed this act, which introduced a feed-in tariff program in 2010, which went on for 5 streams, as what was discontinued in 2016. But what was special about this program in terms of renewable energy co-op activity is that it had community-specific incentives. So in the first stream, it had a price adder for community and Indigenous proponents. And after the second stream, until the end, there was a capacity set aside. So a capacity that only renewable energy co-ops could apply to get contracts. So without competition from corporate actors. That did not play out like that. And this is a topic for another discussion, presentation, and paper. But a lot of corporate actors actually started sort of spin-off co-ops to take advantage of this policy. So overall, there were 110 renewable energy cooperatives incorporated in the province, which is a significant number. However, you know, I've done the research and saw that only 32 of them had public-facing outlets, like a website, even a phone number, and had public, you know, fundraising efforts. The rest were usually just a PO box and a corporate number. So which shows that, you know, there were groups most likely coming from corporate groups of renewable energy developers who started a co-op and raised money from a very small number of people just to take advantage of this. Okay, so how did I go about looking into democratic member engagement in Ontario's renewable energy co-ops? I did semi-structured interviews with leading renewable energy co-op members to understand their, you know, what's your perception of democratic member engagement in your co-op, and what do you think the barriers are? What could you have done better? And what is sort of the result of the environment you were in? And I've also done semi-structured interviews with investor members. So members who are not necessarily involved in the day-to-day operations of renewable energy co-ops. And perhaps I should take a step back. There's really 2 types of members in renewable energy co-ops. One is the mega sort of involved in project development, right? Usually part of the board of directors, putting in a lot of volunteer hours and their expertise to use to develop this very complex project. And then the other group is sort of members who just buy shares and invest and receive dividends, right? And it was very, very difficult to get in touch with those members, what I call investor members, because there's not a lot of engagement with the co-op to begin with. So I really relied on personal relationships of leading renewable energy co-op members to reach these members, which meant that the investor members are usually AGM attending, so they're in the minority of a little bit engaged members. So, I mean, no surprises. This is sort of across the board what I heard. About 5% of members participates in meetings, either of meetings, AGMs, or events. You know, some people said 8%, some people said 10%, but you know, the general understanding is it's about 5 to 8%. So it's quite low. But why, right? So this was the actual point of the research exercise. Why? One thing I heard is that, you know, this is just the nature of, this is an investment co-op, right? And it's designed to raise capital, to develop these, you know, a lot of the leading renewable energy co-op members, a lot of these renewable energy co-ops that are not corporate based, emerged out of local green social groups, right? Sometimes organizations, sometimes like environmentally minded people who want to do something good. And they saw this opportunity and they had money and time and expertise available. and they want to develop this. And the way that this can happen is that you need to raise investment for it. So this is the nature of it. That's the primary relationship of the member and the co-op. So that's why member engagement, yes, it's beneficial, but at the same time, this is sort of, it is what it is sort of what I heard, right? Another side of it is, of course, with investment co-ops, as opposed to, let's say, worker co-ops or multi-stakeholder co-ops, producer co-ops, there's a lack of everyday interactions, right? And community building. There's just this core group of people who are, putting a lot of volunteer hours to make this project a reality. But outside of that, the main relationship with the co-op of investor members is investing and receiving a dividend. And they see it as, tying into Domenica's presentation, what we heard is a lot is it's a values-based investment, and it's an impact investment. It's environmentally doing something positive, right? This is what we heard from leading members. From investor members. And it was so novel that the Renewable Energy Co-op actually had to be incorporated. The Cooperative Act needed to be changed to accommodate for this Renewable Energy Co-op model, because in Ontario we had this rule of every co-op needs to do 50% of its business with their members. However, in an investment co-op that's developing a renewable energy project and selling it to a provincial grid, right? It's not liberalized. There's no way that those kilowatts can reach the members, right? So they need to change the whole structure, accommodate for this, so that investments from across the province could be accepted. So the focus is really on investment and making renewable energy generation a possibility. But the other issue that I really noticed is a lot of the leading members said, listen, we really do believe in co-ops, right? This is why we sort of went into this. And it's an environmentally minded project, and we really believed in the associated benefits of co-ops too. However, the project development process was just so arduous. There were regulatory barriers in terms of putting the applications in. A lot of the co-ops had to submit an offering statement to the Financial Services Commission of Ontario, which is incredibly arduous and time and money cost intensive. There were technical barriers in sense. Many of you may know 60% of electricity in Ontario comes from 3 nuclear plants. So it's a very, very centralized system that in a lot of cases did not know what to really do with decentralized renewable energy generation. So a lot of renewable energy co-ops experience technical barriers such as that, and financial barriers, right? You're trying to raise capital from members, but also from financial institutions who did not necessarily know a lot about the co-op model, or they just thought this was too small and too risky to provide loans at competitive rates. And there were no state-backed loan guarantees such as exist in Germany. So the outcome of that is, apart from a handful of co-ops, all of them over-relied on volunteer labor, right? They need to recruit people with the right technical, engineering, legal, financial skills onto their board so that they could get this done. But remember, most of them, almost all of them had daytime jobs too. And soon enough, just to keep the project afloat, member engagement became not a priority, right? One leading member said, we're business first, we have to stay afloat. And to stay afloat, we have to put all of our energy pretty much into making this very arduous process come to a conclusion so that we can generate electricity, generate income, and do the other things that we want to do. So organizational capacity was a big barrier. One success story we heard of was actually, it's one of the handful of co-ops that I mentioned who were able to scale up enough in terms of portfolio size and hire a full-time staff. What they did is they started advisory groups, right? So a technical advisory group, business advisory group, communications advisory group. They found key people in their community, recruited them to these groups. And of course, having a full-time staff helps with this, right? So recruitment and keeping it going and focusing on member engagement. And this co-op is also able to be involved in policy advocacy and public education, aside from just focusing on project development. And that, of course, has to do with organizational capacity. But this is the co-op that actually said, probably had the most positive impression of member engagement among all of the ones that I interviewed. So just as a, in the way of a quick conclusion discussion, what we saw is that governance often took a backseat, given the arduous project development processes and lack of organizational capacity. Right, you're just scrambling to put in a contract, get the regulatory approvals, and then raising the capital, and then so. And in a lot of cases, even once they have the operational projects, the income still is not good enough. The returns in the initial years is not good enough to actually, hire or focus on this. This is what we heard. So this ties to actual policy design, right? And all of the barriers that they face. So if an enabling policy environment and program design could have actually helped renewable energy co-ops, maybe with additional financing, technical support, legal support, streamlining of regulatory and technical processes, really could have helped these organizations who were, in some cases, as I mentioned, are coming from grassroots groups and really believed in the co-op model and wanted to focus on member engagement, but just simply could not. And we saw that, through the example of the success story. All of the co-op names are anonymized, so I'm not going to mention names, but their capacity and willingness to focus on governance yielded very positive results. And the co-op was really able to pursue not only its environmental mission, but also its social mission as well, through public education and policy advocacy. And then I want to conclude with this one question that came up in one of the interviews, right? Given why they exist, to advance renewable energy generation in a community-based way, should member participation be normatively pursued in investment co-ops, such as renewable energy co-ops? And maybe that can kickstart our discussion, or I'd like to hear what you think of this as well. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, Fiona, the role of being part of a network or federation or sister co-ops.
Yeah, it's a good question, Fiona. So the renewable energy co-ops in Ontario started the Federation of Community Power Co-ops, during the first stream of the FIT program. So like this umbrella association of renewable energy co-ops. But one of the biggest issues they experienced, just as the individual co-ops, was organizational capacity, right? It was mostly done on a volunteer basis. And there was not enough surplus cash to sort of hire someone and focus on this full-time, although it was discussed. And perhaps it was actually going to become a reality, but then the FIT program was discontinued in late 2016. It definitely and absolutely could have helped. But in all of the interviews that I did, like governance and member engagement is so low in the priority list, right? The priority, especially for volunteer-based organizations, which was most of them, the priority was just making the project a reality. Often with, after hours work, someone told me, for about 6 months there was 40 to 50 hours a week, which imagine if you're also working a full-time job. So yeah, and that's why you keep going back to, okay, one thing that we can say is, definitely policy and program design has a big impact, right? But given the reality of that, is it something that should have been normatively pursued no matter what? And it's not like they didn't try, they sent out emails and sometimes had events. But a lot of the times it was also how I feel like that investment was viewed. It was just viewed as, rather than it being a co-op, it could have been a fund, it could have been a bond, it could have been something else, right? But, oh, this is local, environmentally positive, great, I'll invest in this. That was mostly the impression that they got from the investor members.
Erin, do you have a question?
Hi, Daria. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really just wanted to add to that because I was among the group that was a first investor in the ZooShare co-op in Toronto, which is, for those who don't know about it, converting animal waste into energy, which is now has a plant and it's up and running. And I watched the process through the newsletters along the way. I didn't expect as an investor to be engaged because I don't have that expertise, so to speak, but I enjoyed that it was a co-op model. I knew if things were going in a direction that didn't seem like what we had all intended, then we could sort of enable our voice in the democratic process, but at the same time knew that it was this huge capital management project that took, up until now, that was maybe 2013, 14. So huge amount of work by the core staff and the consultants involved as well. So I still value the co-op model in this way, but I think that there wasn't an expectation that there would be member engagement and some of the more technical things needed earlier on.
Yeah, and ZooShare is one of the handful of ones who actually had a full-time staff and actually a part-time staff as well. And I know that they value member engagement. However, to the extent, like you said, the extent to which, in a very technically, financially complex process, legally complex process, the impression I got is that if we open everything to member vote, right, continually, it would have really slowed down an already very arduous process. And as a ZooShare investor, how long it took them and how many barriers they had to overcome. And I think it took them in total 8 years, Erin?
I think about 8 years, yeah.
From start to actually having an operational plant. So yeah, you're a renewable energy co-op member. You have a point there. And that's why the question at the end that I concluded with really resonated with me as someone, I'm a firm believer in co-ops, especially for their role in potentially advancing social justice and democratic member engagement. However, in this case, should it be normatively pursued? It's about the question.
Okay.
This is more maybe of a comment that you could follow up on. Maybe I'm just thinking about our research on this and how it's somewhat connected, because through the focus groups, what we heard was that these prospective members who are looking to become members and those are currently members, they had this idea that they wanted to be involved. So it varied between, there were individuals that just wanted to invest, but there were others that wanted to be part of the decision-making process, or they wanted to have like hands-on experience saying, well, let me do plumbing if I'm a plumber, right? Or let me advocate because I'm well connected in the community. They wanted that hands-on. And now I'm thinking, kind of going back to Fiona's comment of like, will they actually follow through on that once the time comes? Because it's very interesting to see that there was this engagement that they were like, no, let me make my money help, but also let me help as well. So I don't know your thoughts on that, or what you
no, for sure. That's where I feel like our research is really connected. At the end of the day, renewable energy co-ops didn't go out in the community when they were doing their outreach or advertising or what have you. They weren't going out saying, join our co-op to become part of our team and let's work on this project together. They were saying, minimum investment $1,000, anticipated return on investment this, right? Like it was advertised as an investment opportunity,
okay.
An ethical, environmentally minded investment opportunity itself. So I don't think the members who invested, like the people who joined the board, that sort of goes to what you're saying, and they had to commit, and some of them had to fold, unfortunately, because they just there was either burnout or a regulatory refusal or what have you. But so that group actually mostly followed up on their promise. But with the investing members, there was never really a promise. It was already advertised as an investment opportunity on which they were going to get a return, and that's what happened. And some of them, either through personal connections or because they were interested in it, attended some events and AGMs, and from what I heard, the associated benefits did happen, right? A lot of them told me, the ones that I interviewed said, never even heard of a co-op before, or never been part of a co-op. It was very democratic. I really liked the AGM. It was different than what I'm used to at the workplace in terms of hierarchy, and so there were those associated benefits, but those were just for individuals who sort of went out of that only investor box and said, oh, let me actually see what's happening here. I co-own this, okay, so let me go see and interact with these people. But that's a very small majority, very small proportion of the renewable energy co-op membership in Ontario.
Thank you.
I wonder if it seems like there's almost a tension, like an analogy on the software side. If in code, if everything works well, the command line's silent. It doesn't send you any messages, right? And on that side, if you want people to really have most of their assets in a cooperative economy, and you want to scale this and have time to do all of the other organizing work, maybe it's good that people are spending less time on one. On the other side, if it's a symptom of real lack of capacity, or if there's something that couldn't unlock, or if it's not achieving it, then there's a real tension there. So is there a way to distinguish? Is it always a trade-off, or are there sort of regimes or regions where it's like, yeah, let's make this as efficient as possible because people are going to be in, ideally 100 or 1,000 of these. Or
I mean, that's such an excellent point. And that's sort of also the catch-22 in terms of the co-op that I identified as a success story. It's not only that, it became successful so it could pursue member engagement. It became also successful because it had a lot of member engagement in those advisory boards. So it's not like this is, all co-ops are doomed, right? But we also have to understand that they come from an urban area with a lot of relevant expertise and a lot of political connections and a lot of, right? So not every region has access to that either.
Well, that's another point that with one of my other questions is if these are largely like there are structural challenges and research questions around how do you build sustained rural wealth and rural capacity, right? And distance, and like it just takes longer to get to a meeting, and there's all of these barriers, that kind of thing. And these are often like you need a lot of space, so they do tend to engage with rural communities in different ways. Yeah,
one of the many case studies I did on a co-op that I don't like the word failure, but decided to not pursue it anymore, was in one of the poorest rural areas in Ontario. And there were two issues. One, of course, individual with capital, the expertise in terms of, relevant expertise, right? The legal, financial, technical, which is, it's quite exclusionary to a lot of people who do not have the privilege to receive that education. And at the same time, they also face social barriers because of the rhetoric of wind energy around in Ontario. And they weren't even developing a wind project. They were developing a solar project, but there was still resistance within the community in terms of willingness of people to, let alone be involved, but to invest or even just accept it. So in rural areas, I'm by no means an expert on rural co-op development or rural areas, but this is just the contrast that I heard from the interviews that I did. And the person from the rural area said, if we had access to what people in urban areas have access to in terms of just the people, right, with the money, expertise, and volunteer time to invest in this, I think this would have become a reality. But at one point, it just became insurmountable. Yeah, and the others
on solidarity of us locally, but the solidarity sometimes rural, urban, and adjacent places matters as well.
Yeah.
Another place.
Exactly, and bringing the social justice focus in, like that's a huge, like it just speaks to the barrier that exists in that sense geographically, right? But what about the sort of uneven access to these resources in urban areas as well, right? Racialized, economically marginalized communities were largely excluded from this, primarily, in two main ways. And I tried to talk about this in my publication that's coming up. In one sense, it was a very top-down introduction of a policy. And renewable energy projects are very costly. So without participatory design, like including individuals who could benefit the most from these projects because they're suffering from energy poverty or poverty in general, and who could really benefit from renewable energy systems, they were not included in policy or program design. And they were not considered. It's like, okay, how, if we have this initiative, how can all communities benefit, right? And it goes back to Domenica's point about washing, right? So there was a big community washing of this policy, right? Oh, here for we're supporting community energy, but what communities? Like, what communities have the capacity to actually undertake and realize the benefits, which could be quite beneficial for a community? Renewable energy co-ops could realize the benefits of this. And the second aspect of that is actually, unfortunately, conscious decisions made by renewable energy co-ops that were very exclusionary in terms of organizational capacity. So they said, we don't have the organizational like we wanted to have minimum investment at $100, but that would mean we would have to manage 500 rather than 50 investments. And we don't have the organizational, financial capacity in the short or long term to do that. And we knew individuals through our social circles who could invest a lot of money, and that's what we did. So there's sort of that two-way exclusion of marginalized communities. And I would urge to reconsider any policy or program design in the future who wants to invest in community energy to take consideration of this. But also, I'd like to sort of point our attention to public energy, right? Where government can directly invest in these communities, where they can collectively own and manage these energy systems. But the investment, you're putting the onus of the investment and making the project the reality on public institutions rather than communities who have very limited access to resources. Sorry about the tirade.
And then everyone wouldn't need to restart
Exactly, yeah.
from the beginning. There's a tension between because it's so technically complex, like the skill set that you need to realize a project is also maybe far from the skill set that you need to engage too. And so cooperatives that are built around something that is engaging, cafes and things like that have a huge advantage, or public spaces. And it would be interesting in terms of sharing of it. Does your publication, oh, Erin, go ahead. I was gonna ask, do you have policy insight, any recommendations?
Hi again.
Hi.
I had to step away for a minute, so I apologize if I am rehashing something that already got raised, but I was wondering how often you were finding for folks that did have investor members and or community bond projects, how often were they using a third party like Tapestry Capital or firms like that try to enable these kinds of cooperatives to gain capital to get going?
Again, a very small number who use third parties, but now what we're seeing, especially after the discontinuation of FIT, is a lot of, especially rural or smaller size urban renewable energy co-ops. They're just saying, we can't pursue any more projects. Because we can't pursue projects, we can't generate the income, the necessary income to have enough human resources and financial resources to make this organization sustainable. So a lot of them actually sold or are looking to sell their energy to larger co-ops who do have access to those third-party resources and community bonds. And SolarShare is a great example of that. And yeah, in terms of there's the larger co-ops who are able to sort of build a large portfolio and create the organizational capacity also adopted, there's 3 organizations like this, developed a hub and spoke model. As in there's usually a not-for-profit co-op, that's the hub. And then there's for-profit, usually spoke renewable energy cooperatives. And, the hub helps establish the spokes and then signs service agreements with them to make it also financially sustainable. And then there's always a running capital, with the money that for-profits pay the for-profit co-op, the hub. There's sort of this pool of capital that's available to be invested in other projects. So that's been one of the success models. I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question.
Wonderful. So we have about 5 minutes before we get cut off. Any final comments or one last question, or we can take a few moments before we go into our next session and grab something something to drink or eat. Thank you so much, Domenica. Thank you, Daria. Thank you everyone for coming. Great presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much, Federation staff, Jingi, Vera. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.